In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at these current conditions. We're going to be diving into the tropics as we do have multiple systems to track, especially that one that is threatening the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. We definitely need to focus in on that one as it is expected to become a major hurricane and bring major impacts. Now, we're going to be talking about the upcoming pattern as well, but the overall focus is that tropical system today. We do see that the current conditions, we do see some of this activity from what was Hurricane Fiona. There, it's now a post-tropical system over Canada, obviously, and unfortunately, those impacts were devastating up there in Canada. We don't have the full story yet, obviously, on what has occurred as the storm is still ongoing, but I think the aftermath is going to look a lot worse than even some people anticipated. It's going to be shocking and go down as one of the worst storms in Canadian history. Obviously, very, very terrible. And the outskirts of it are just being felt here in New England, the very eastern end of Maine, and really the very eastern end of the United States for the most part. Now, we can see that there is some activity happening here in the northern United States. And we can actually physically see, there's probably a low up here, but we can physically see this cold front, this next one coming through, just like this. There's some pretty cold air behind this as well. Obviously, things are a little bit cooler for the most part already, but this is over the course of the next few days going to work its way eastward as things will warm up a little bit in the east today, tomorrow, and even a little bit of Monday, but then we're going to see even colder conditions for a week plus after that. So things are looking very cool. And fall, I think, is here to stay for the most part. We do have plenty of storminess happening down here in the Gulf states and offshore the southeast, but really nothing compared to what we've seen in the past few months as things are winding down as far as the summer-like conditions, even far south like that. So let's zoom into a couple different regions. We do see that there is some light showers moving down southward through the Dakotas. We can see that there is a bit of activity along the northern edge of this front in here. A little bit heavier in some spots, especially there in Michigan, both the lower and upper peninsula. We see the yellows popping up, indicating more moderate precipitation. As we move southward, we can see a little bit more sporadic down here for Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, North Carolina at this point. And this is only heading further east and further south, so we will see more people begin to get impacted by this. And then we have some scattered and isolated pockets of precipitation here for Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and some surrounding states. Now, to take a look at this activity down here for the Gulf states, we still see some of these tropical thunderstorms, especially here in Texas, looking pretty tropical, but a little bit quieter than we've seen before, like I mentioned, over the course of the summer. And then last but not least, we can see the remnants of Fiona just sending these bands here very close to very far eastern Maine, but it looks like it's just not going to reach in, which is very surprising. It's very, very close, but it's just staying on that Canadian end of things. We might see, obviously, some of these stray bands make their way into eastern Maine there, and I'm sure the wind today for all of New England is just rip-roaring, and especially yesterday as well, but nothing compared to what Canada is feeling, obviously, as those major impacts with this very, very major storm are still overhead. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to move on. We're going to focus on the upcoming pattern, as we'll talk about the temperatures, precipitation, snowfall, all sorts of things as we head into the next little bit. And we'll actually see into the earlier portion of October now as we approach the month of October. It's crazy to think about. So we'll talk about that and obviously take a deep dive into the tropics. Now, here we are taking a look at the upcoming storminess, and there's not going to be a whole lot happening until we do see this cold front and low pressure system come through. This will be later on the day during Sunday, which will be tomorrow. So we're going to see this start to occur. Again, today is going to be a little bit warmer than yesterday. Tomorrow will be a lot warmer than it has been. But afterwards, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to see much cooler conditions. And we can literally see the jet stream is diving down here in the eastern United States. So we can see the cold air and the storminess moving in, especially here to the Great Lakes and the interior northeast here with a low pressure center overhead. We do see this tropical system, obviously going to be very impactful. Something like this seems to be the most likely track. So we'll watch this take place. We see it really intensify as it passes near the Florida Keys, Cuba as well, and approaches mainland Florida there. We're really going to have to watch this as the Tampa Bay, just the west side of Florida, gets slammed with a major hurricane. It really stalls out and it takes its time for sure here over Florida, which will lead towards more of a flooding risk for sure. And it starts to really throw some storminess up and down the southeast coast here, which will need to be watched. So we see that this moves up inland. We see plenty of storminess throughout all of these regions, and this is going to lead towards some potential flooding, even pretty far from the actual storm. So to reiterate, we see that these areas start to see storminess very soon from this system. Probably, I would say, Tuesday is when the storminess starts. We expect landfall to occur early on Wednesday, potentially for the Florida Keys, or at least that low coming very, very close to the Florida Keys is going to happen very early on Wednesday. The main landfall, though, should happen Wednesday afternoon/evening time frame here, and it's going to sit overhead through the night into Thursday. It won't move that far, and then Friday it'll move up into the southeast, or potentially, alternatively, offshore of the East Coast here would be a much more intense track, as it would be able to re-intensify. And potentially, we've seen some models trend at it curving back into the eastern United States. That could be a scenario, but obviously the less impactful scenario is going to be a more inland track like this that I just drew, because it's not going to be able to re-intensify over the water. So there is multiple different scenarios at play, and there's big differences between the two. We see plenty of rainfall really get thrown up the East Coast, and it sticks around through Sunday, October 2nd here, and even Monday, October 3rd. We see it just moving out, and we're left with a big trough in the eastern United States again by that time frame. Also, some of the first snowfall there for New England as well. Now, as far as total precipitation, or better yet, let's take a look at the GFS model. Sorry about that. We see this model intensifies the storm further. It doesn't even come close to the Florida Keys. On the European model, we saw something like this, and then it doesn't move offshore, actually. I don't know what I'm doing here. So it does this. Something like this is what the European model does. We already see, and I'll change the color here to make it easier to differentiate, but we see that the GFS model is taking it well west of what the European model was showing, but it comes back. It does come back pretty close to the same area of impact around the Tampa Bay, but it does weaken before landfall here. Obviously, in these types of scenarios, usually it's better to go with what the European model is showing. However, any model can be correct, so we will consider every single option. The impacts for the East Coast, however, are pretty similar here. It does become a bit of a nor'easter and move up the coast and obviously bring plenty of precipitation. Now, total precipitation through the next 10 days, here we are taking a look at it. And if you're anywhere in the whites, we're expecting practically no precipitation. Your grays will be about 1/10 of an inch or less of precipitation. Your greens would be 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. Your blues would be 1/2 an inch to an inch. Your yellows would be 1 inch to 2 inches. Your reds would be 2 to 5 inches. Your browns would be 5 to 10 inches. And then your blues there for Florida, we see about 10 to 15 inches of precipitation for those regions. And there's even some magentas around for the Tampa Bay area, which would be 15 to 20 inches of rainfall. And that's probably due to that very stalled out motion it does here. I mean, it really just sticks around in Florida, dropping rainfall for far longer than a quick moving storm would. Total snowfall here, if you're anywhere in the grays, we're expecting a dusting. If anything, blues will be 2 to 6 inches of snowfall. And that's all we have for the United States, so we're going to stop there. But we do see that some of the southern Rockies, especially here, are beginning to get some snowfall as we're still red here. Let's switch that back to yellow. I think yellow is the most visible color to do, so that's why I usually do it. It's total snowfall. Now the temperature pattern, here we are. We're in a deep Arctic blast, obviously, for this time of year. This Arctic air mass has just moved down and stuck around. But as you can see, by later today, we're going to be much less cold. We're going to be pretty neutral here in the eastern United States. Still pretty cold, but pretty neutral. And by Sunday, look at that. The high temperature is going to be warmer for a lot of folks. Still colder in here because that cold front has come through. Overnight that night, that next cold front will come through, and we see the Arctic blast by midweek here. So Monday to Wednesday, we're at Wednesday at this frame. We have deep Arctic air set over the eastern half of the nation, really just reaffirming a second Arctic blast in this pattern in late September has been something we haven't seen in years. And this one sticks around. I mean, look, Friday, we're still below normal temperatures. Sunday, the 2nd here, it finally looks like we're seeing some cold air dive into the western United States, indicating a negative PNA, which means that there is Definitely a trough here and a ridge right there, as you can see, and pretty neutral here in the east. Uh, we don't really see cold air move back in. If anything, we see warm air for the most part try to trend in as we have a deep negative PNA here. Warm air surging into the central and a bit of the eastern United States where things will be more neutral here as we approach October. And that lasts all the way until October 10th on this model, which is pretty far out to take it with a grain of salt. The interesting thing to note is that a lot of areas in the yellows here and oranges are 1 to 7 degrees above normal. Your average temperature is probably going to be about 10 degrees or more lower by October 10th as opposed to September 24th today. So it's easy to assume that 5 degrees above normal on October 10th will still be colder than, let's say, average temperatures or slightly below average temperatures on September 24th. So things will still be cooling. It's just going to be a lot more subtle according to this model. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook. Here we are taking a look at it. We have a lot going on here. We have the remnants there of Fiona still just totally leading towards major impacts in Canada there. We have tropical storm Gaston there, and then we have tropical storm Hermione. I think that's how you say it. I'm saying it like the Harry Potter character. Now we see that we have tropical storm Ian, which is going to be our potential storm to impact the southeast. Well, not really potential. We do expect that that is what's going to take place for Florida, especially, but also the rest of the East Coast is at risk of seeing some impacts from this one. We thought this one could have been named the H name, but it ended up being Ian because that one offshore of Africa formed first, which is pretty interesting. We still have an area of interest here in our MDR or main development region. We can see that this one has a 20% chance of development over the next 48 hours and a 30% chance of development over the next 5 days, which is relatively low, but we do usually see these systems start out at these low percentages. And this could rise over time. Very active in the Atlantic right now, and definitely things have just taken off after a very, very, very slow start, historically slow start to the hurricane season this year. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the cone forecast for two of our systems. Now our first one, and the obvious one, I'm going to actually refresh this because we might have the 11 a.m. update, and we do here, and I'm glad I did that because as you can see, we only had one time frame where we expected major hurricane from this one. Now we have two, and this one is expected to become a hurricane by 8 p.m. tomorrow, as it will bring some pretty far away impacts to Jamaica. It will be a major hurricane by the time it's reaching Cuba there at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, and it's expected to stay that way at least till 8 a.m. on Wednesday, where it will probably lower to a Category 2 or 1 by 8 a.m. on Thursday, according to our National Hurricane Center here, just to the north of the Tampa Bay, which is pretty interesting. That's a lot more like what the GFS is showing here, what we're seeing on our cone forecast here. The European model shows it hit a little bit south of the Tampa Bay area. It's important to note that the low pressure center can really track anywhere over the cone is what the expectation is, and it can even go outside of the cone, although they don't like to talk about that. But it can, and it has happened, and it has happened with systems this year, actually, where unexpected things happen. They try to consider all possibilities, but I think oftentimes they keep the cone way, way, way too small. In most cases, I would go with a much wider cone if I was, for some reason, in charge of making the cone forecast, which I'm not. But I think that usually considering more options is better, and more people being prepared is better than a more narrow forecast that could easily be wrong. Could it stay a major hurricane as it approaches Florida? Absolutely. And I think if it goes offshore the southeast, there's a really good chance it becomes a major hurricane again, unfortunately. So there's a lot going on with this storm. We need to talk about it a lot. Real quickly, here's the storm up there in Canada. We see just tons going on here. It's expected to stay pretty much at tropical storm strength all the way through Monday as it's reaching like the Arctic Circle. And it's going to be a depression well north of kind of the southern tip of Greenland. Very interesting to see this storm staying this intense that northward. It's obviously a post-tropical cyclone, but still that's what the intensity is going to be at. It's still a hurricane right now with 85 mile per hour sustained winds over Canada. Crazy, crazy stuff here. Now, be sure to tune in with us daily as we will just be tracking Hurricane Ian, every single day. Important updates are on the way, and I think We're going to narrow this down over the coming days really, really nicely. So we need to watch it very closely. We'll also be updating you guys on the upcoming pattern continuously, not only just throughout this upcoming pattern, but probably for years to come. So be sure to subscribe, be sure to tune in daily, as we'll be focusing on all of these things, especially with the winter coming up. I'm very, very excited for that. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts. I'll see you guys in the next video.